This video starts a new series called Tales from the Archives, where I find interesting works of art found within the Library of Congress or some other well-credited archival system and bring them to you to life. So today, let's talk about this fascinating place, the Arivin Federal Government Camp, also known as the Sunset Labor Camp or the Weedpatch Camp. Quick little interlude, when I was editing this project, I realized that the labor camp sounds a little more vicious than what it is in the context of history. We're not talking about a labor camp found in World War II. No, this is a labor camp where migrants would come to work to be able to start providing for their family. It was a place of refuge, not a place of forced labor. Think of it almost like in South Park, you know, when the Wi-Fi goes down and they go to different camps to be able to kind of be refugees and be able to find Wi-Fi and work. That's exactly what this is, but in a more, realistic standpoint where they're going to find work and be able to find their family. It wasn't forced labor by any means. They were getting paid for their work. They would have different sections where they could work. There was just a lot of people that were in the camp and not to be much work to have go around. We'll talk a little bit more about that within the video and within the piece itself. I just really want to clarify that since it sounds a little more vindictive and evil than what it truly is. By no means was this an amazing place, but it's not the labor camp that is associated with more darker times of history. Today, we're going to talk about a fascinating place that seems to be the epicenter of American history in the 1940s, a place of hardship and strife, while also being a cultural hub of significance that we may not be aware of, and the impacts that this place delivered and anyone that passed by it may have been an indication of American folklore, American history, and US pop culture for the remaining years. This place we're talking about is the Arivin Federal Government Camp, also known as the Sunset Labor Camp or the Weedpatch Camp. The latter name is what we're going to be using to talk about the camp further, the Weedpatch Camp. It was a government-led program by the Farm Security Administration in South Bakersfield, California in 1936 to help house migrant workers from both the Great Depression and the ongoing Dust Bowl. Just to give a brief history on the Dust Bowl, it occurred in the mid-1930s where there was a combination of droughts and heavy dust storm that plagued throughout farmlands all throughout the central portion of the US, whether that be Oklahoma, 2/3 of the Texas Panhandle, northeastern New Mexico, the western third of Kansas, and the southeastern side of Colorado, while also ravaging Nebraska, South Dakota, Wyoming, Minnesota, North Dakota. Nevertheless, no matter the location, it took a huge toll on the American agricultural system, and on top of that, with the Great Depression, it led to some unfavorable times within the US history. So the federal government decided to open up a camp where they can house these migrants to allow them to work and have safe passage to a healthier living conditions. The migrants that moved to California will be called Okies. Would be called Okays. Would be called Okays. Okies, Okays, O-K-I-E-S. I honestly don't know how to pronounce it, but it sounds like Okays. And from there, the town had hardship and strife. Even though it was considered a labor camp, there was still inconsistent farm work to be had. And the community fell into poverty with rampant homelessness and unsanitary living conditions. There was even large case spread of disease amongst the residents, like smallpox, tuberculosis, malaria, and valley fever, which is a fungal disease that you can get from living in a harsh desert condition like in Bakersfield, California. You have a community that was facing such turbulent times, they tend to band together and start lifting each other's spirits. And the way they did it at the Weedsville camp was through communal songs, ritual dances, and celebrations on a monthly basis. And throughout their days, they would sing songs of strife and hardship. These monthly rituals and festivities started to become very popular, and a bit of a form of escapism, not only for the residents of the Weedsville camp, but for people all throughout the nation started to come over. All throughout the late 1930s and 40s, people were making their way down to the camp just so they could experience this momentous occasion. Then in the 1940s, we have a name by Charles L. Todd and Roger Sonkin. They were so fascinated by these tales of sorrow and strifes and the beautiful music that was coming out of it, they decided to record interviews in different mixed media formats of people dancing, taking photos, recording interviews about the Dust Bowl, hearing the songs, having people sing about their troubling times. And let me tell you something, the singing that you hear on these recordings are filled with such passion and heartache, it is undescribable. Maybe it's the vintage microphones and the static hiss that you hear underneath the silence, but the performers who sing it And the people who read the poetry are talking and singing with despair in their heart, and you can hear it in their voice. You can hear the life of despair that they've gone through. And there are some notable interactions that I found within the archives, but I implore you to go into the Library of Congress website and look at these tales yourself. It is riveting to go through this rabbit hole, but today let's talk about a few of them. The first song I want to talk about today is The Old Apple Tree in the Orchard. I think the best way to experience this is not through me talking about it and deconstructing it, which we will do later. I just want you to stop and just take a listen to this song in its entirety. It's very short. So just sit back and relax and listen to the song.
Oh, the old apple tree in the orchard, it lives in my memory, 'cause it reminds me of my pappy. He was handsome, young, and happy when he planted the old apple tree. So one day Pappy took Widow Norton out on a jamboree, and when he brought her home that sun up, Brother Norton raised his gun up and he chased Pappy up in the tree. Oh, when the neighbors came after my pappy, up in the tree was he. And so they took a rope and strung him by the neck, and then they hung him to a branch on the old apple tree. Say goodbye, say goodbye, say goodbye to the old apple tree. Now if my pappy hadn't knowed it, he'd be sorry that he growed it, 'cause he died on the old apple tree. When the neighbors came after my pappy, up in the tree was he. The neighbors took a rope and strung him by the neck, and then they hung him to a branch on the old apple tree. Sing some more?
Where'd you learn that one?
In Oklahoma. Sing
Know any others?
Oh, golly.
Can you think of the next verse?
No.
The first thing that you'll notice is how eerie this song sounds as this little girl sings about her dad basically being hung from a tree that he grew himself. So the little girl who sings this beautiful song is then being watched by all these men as she's singing with such pain and heartache. Now, this is a song of strife that was popular during the Great Depression, during the Dust Bowl. There is a lot of renditions that you can find today of people still singing this song about their heritage. Though the most fascinating thing about this song that was sung was that it seemed to have been sang by Ruth Brown, which she was top billed in the credits of the archives, and now there's no direct evidence that this was actually a famed jazz singer, Ruth Brown, who had a very famous career. But if you do a little bit of research, it all points to her being the person who sang this song. You see, Ruth Brown was born in January 12th, 1928. This was recorded in July 28th, 1940, which would make her about 12 and a half years old at this point, which aligns with the tonality and the characteristics of the child who's singing this voice. It also appears to be a person singing of color, which Ruth Brown is inevitably a person of African American descent, which is exactly what you hear in the song as well. One other thing I want you to listen to is Ruth Brown singing a more popular song from her career. Obviously, there is a more maturity in her voice, but it nevertheless sounds exactly like her, just a little bit older. Here, take a listen.
Someday the time will arrive. Someday, if faith can survive.
The evidence is pretty damning with the two voices side by side. Though there isn't a lot of evidence of Ruth Brown's early career, and there's no strong evidence that she visited the camp as well, since she was with her parents' custody at the time. Though when she did turn 16, she tended to be a bit of a jazz vagabond, where she would go traveling with her boyfriend singing jazz throughout the country. So I'm sure when she went to this camp, this could have inspired her vagabond years. I like to personally think the famed Ruth Brown is a person that sings this with the name matching up and the timelines, but we all leave that up to your research and up to your context of how you feel about the situation. I find it so fascinating that this mid-century celebrity found her way in her youth to be part of this archival system. It's something so fascinating that people of talent tend to find themselves throughout history no matter what happens. If Ruth never became a celebrity all on her own, she would have still been remembered by history as she was part of this archival system. But nevertheless, she worked hard in her singing career to become the legend that she is now known today. Obviously, she's a little more obscure, but I like to think that her being in the archives means that she gets to live on in infamy as long as the archival system remains active. Now let's move on to our next song. It's more of a worker's plight man singing tune, but he is aware of the longevity of the career that he had, and it's still a very lengthy song, so I'm actually going to be cutting it down to the most important parts while still keeping its essence and keeping a longer take in there as well, so you get a full feel of it, because there's also a lot of talking that happens in the song as well before he starts singing. Let's just take a moment and listen to this tune.
Here's I shouldered up my gun, first of them Spaniards that I saw, I dropped that gun and run in that war. Kenley says that I got up a flag to get it if I could. Told him let him keep it, we others had it just as good in that war.
So what you just heard was an old man singing about the war that happened in Cuba. And if you're already deduced, he was an actual Rough Rider who fought alongside Theodore Roosevelt, which is an incredibly fascinating tale that happened over 43 years from the day that he recorded that song. Meaning that this individual who sung this song was in his early 20s and is now probably in his 60s and 70s, which perfectly aligns with the tonality of the voice in this song. You can hear this much older gentleman who has experienced a life of pain and turbulent times. So just to give you some context of who the Rough Riders were, they were the National Guardsmen and Cavalry Squad of the 2nd Platoon of the 1st U.S. Voluntary Cavalry Squad, and they were trained both in Texas and in Florida, and they landed in Cuba with their horses on June 22nd, 1898 during the Battle of San Juan, and on July 1st of that year, where they were first commanded by the Lieutenant Colonel Roosevelt, who valiantly led an American victory in the Spanish-American War that was actually initially started by Yellow Page propaganda and journalism, where the USS Marine was sunken in the Havana harbor in Cuba, all in the efforts to help with the Cuban independence movement at the time. We all know how history tends to turn on these events, and the independence movement was actually just another form of American imperialism, and yellow journalism was essentially a form of creating publications and news articles to basically get the American people to legitimately back the war effort in this case. Yellowback journalism was essentially eye-catching headlines, clickbait, to make these extravagant news stories to basically hype up any war they wanted to go through at the time. And in this case, it was to gain a new ally in the Caribbean, but we all know, as we talked about a bit earlier, it was to expand a new state or territory in the Caribbean, which was Cuba at the time. Something to note about the Spanish-American War, it was a predecessor to the Vietnam War, where there wasn't much of a legitimate claim to go to war, but it was more so of an act of political favor to go inside and do some type of motive in there. Of course, we lost a lot of men in both these wars, and when they came home, they felt that they had an unjust cause of fighting within said war. A lot of these men did not know what they were fighting for, why they lost their brothers and sisters, why they went through such troubling times, why they faced this trauma. We know how the Vietnam War was seen by the general public, and the Spanish-American War was very similarly viewed by the American people. The difference with the Spanish-American War is that we won the war, but for at what cost? What was the purpose of winning said war? It was more so propaganda than anything else. And in this song that we can hear those tales of strife within his words. Yes, he just talks about going into battle, but his heart and his emotions say that he did not know what he was fighting for. Why did he lose his companions on the side of the battlefield? You can hear it. You can hear it in between the lines as he sings. It is a truly incredible song that I don't even know how it found its way into this part of the archives, but it's there nonetheless. And I'm sure this man has a crazy history where he fights for his country, trying to protect it at all costs. Then he faces the ravages of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and then he ends up working at this migrant camp that has a lot of problems on its own. And then he stumbles upon two men who's willing to record a song that he has deep inside of his heart. And I find that to be the most riveting part about this song. Now let's move on to our next recording. It's of a little girl, and I know we couldn't find anything particular about this little girl, if she had anything to do with history or what have you, but all we do know is that she came from Oklahoma, and I'm just gonna play the song, stop rambling, and just take a listen to the lyrics.
Early one morning I went out to plow. Yodelady, I went out to plow with an old blind ox and an old blind cow. Yodelady and an old blind cow. Oh, Daddy, the devil, he came to my plow. Yodelady, he came to my plow, says one of your family I'm after right now. Yodelady, I'm after right now. Oh, leave my oldest son to plow. Yodelady, my son to plow, it's a wife of yours I'm after right now. Yodelady, I'm after right now. He slung her over across his back. Yodelady, across his back, her old long legs went wiggly-whack. Yodelady, went wiggly-whack. He carried her on and sat down to rest. Yodelady, and sat down to rest. She up with her foot and she kicked him her best. Yodelady, and she kicked him her best. He carried her on to the devil's den. Yodelady, to the devil's den, and there was a prisoner tied with a chain. She up with a shovel and knocked out his brains. Yodelady, and knocked out his brains. Then that little devil peeped over the wall. Yodelady, peeped over the wall, says, take her back, Daddy, she'll murder us all. Yodelady, she'll murder us all. Early one morning I peeped out a crack. Yodelady, I peeped out a crack and saw the old devil come wagging her back. Yodelady, come wagging her back. Oh, Daddy, why did you return so soon? Yodelady, return so soon. She swept out hell and burned up the broom. Yodelady, and burned up the broom. Now, men, you see what women can do. Yodelady, what women can do. They murder their men and the devil too. Yodelady, and the devil too.
That's a long one, isn't it?
So I had the lyrics side by side with the song as we listened to it. And yes, this is a song about a little girl talking about a devil that came to take her mom. And I personally find the devil to be a metaphor for death, but the most crazy part about this story is how the father begs and pleads with the devil, with the Reaper himself, to not take his son, so that way he can keep working to provide for the farms. Imagine the destitute, how desperate this man might have seemed to be, hey, if you're gonna take anybody, please don't take my son, so that way he can keep providing for the family. But inevitably, it goes and takes her mother, which unfortunately, she was able to provide for the family to keep, producing two different children and work as much as she can. And of course, the song ends with a somber note that the devil is coming once again to take somebody else. Imagine being a child that has to work day in and day out and see the troubling times that these parents had to go through. She faced hardship. She's just a kid. Us kids today, I know when I was a child, I was playing on my DS, I was playing with my Switch, I was having a good time on the computer with my friends, doing whatever, going to school. She had none of that. She had basically no childhood. She had to grow up fast. And she is still a child while recording this. And you can hear the strife in her voice. But I could also feel that there's a bit of a sense of, hey, now she's with other kids, she gets to play a little more. I don't know if that's necessarily true. There's not much history on the person that sung this song, but it's just a little happy note I like to add to things to make it feel better. But we know if she was living at the camp, it was definitely a hard time for her as well. I know there wasn't a lot to this recording, but I just found it to be such a moment of emotional impact, and I just wanted to share it. I felt there was a lot to experience there. There was a lot to emotionally go through. You can't really talk about it. You just need to feel it. And I think this piece is exactly what this archival system is made for. Feel the moment. Be there. Transport yourself back into the 1940s. You can never, even if you're a time traveler today, if you were to go back to the 1940s, you would truly never know what it was like to live at that time. You didn't grow up in the 1940s. You didn't grow up in the 1930s. You grew up with a modern retrospective lens. But when you listen to these people sing, you can feel what it might have been like just for a brief moment to live in that time period. It's almost a way of traveling back in time. Let's now move on to our next song. There are actually going to be two different songs and stories within the camp, but I think they don't necessarily relate to each other in the actual progression of the archives, but I think it tells a cohesive story of what it might have been like to live at this camp at that time. Remember, these archival systems are made to be this like pseudo documentary. There was no video at the time massively available to record and produce a documentary, but them taking photos and recording all these voices allows you to travel back in time. And I think these two songs played back to back in no particular order, it's just the order that I chose for this video, gives you a sense of the economy. It gives you a sense of what was the hope, what was it all for to be at this camp. It's hard to explain. You just need to listen for yourself, and we can deconstruct it afterwards.
Along the road on either side, cotton's green, 2 miles wide. Fields fan out in rows, string straight, and a bull flings out his fleecy bait and grins at me and seems to say, "You'll be grabbing at me one day at 6 bits a hundredweight." Then the bulls start rustling, shouting in the air, just like as if they was calling off square. Chase that possum, chase that coon, chase that cotton boll round the moon. Crawl down a row and stand up straight on a 6-bit whirl for a hundredweight. You can live on the land till the day you die, just as long as you leave when the crop's laid by.
To find a job away out west, we'd find it sure, you know. First to Oklahoma, we break our backs in two, trying to find that cotton, 2 months and we were through. From there to Paducah, Texas, we started once again. To find some rural cotton, to me it was a pain. Just 1 week's work, the old man said, you're just a little late, but on to Arizona, the cotton it is great. So Arizona was our next stop, not broke but badly bent. For when we took our purse apart, we found we had 1 cent. We went to work that afternoon. Of course, you know it was cotton. Pretty soon a sandstorm came and sent us in a trotting. The wind it blew, the sand it flew. We thought our little rag house would fall. But pretty soon the storm was over and no one heard at all. So after the cotton was over, to California we must go. There Uncle Sam would feed us. Of course he does, you know. The people there are friendly and ready to lend a hand. Of all the states we've worked in, by this one we will stand. But someday soon, we can't be wrong. We're going back where we belong.
You really want to go back to Arkansas, do you?
Not now. I did then.
Now that we heard it, we understand the context of this camp. People were fleeing from Arkansas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas because their crops were dying left and right. The land was no longer fruitful for them to provide for their families and for others in the community. So those who left were in search of a better opportunity, work, but they were in search of commercial crops like cotton. So they worked hard to be able to pick and gather the cotton so that way they can make some money to be able to go buy at the general shop, to be able to provide for their family. It starts to become this economic revolution that's happening within the camp, that we're no longer, providing just food for ourselves to sustain ourselves, but to pick crops to be able to make money. It's all what the, Civil War was about, is these crash crops that people were titans of industry, obviously on the backs of one of the worst economic systems in history, slavery, how the American Civil War was started to fight and to purge the states of slavery, but also it fuels the American industrial complex as well to be able to pick this cotton. So now you have this time period where not too long ago, they fought to end slavery of picking cotton. Then almost 100 years later or so, you have people dying and fleeing to be able to go start picking this cotton. It is crazy to think about those two mixed bags of how there was so much land to be had before, and it was so fruitful that it was going rampant, and you had this giant American, industrial complex from this cotton picking. Then after a while, with hard time strife, people are just trying to survive off that said cotton and also having a hard time being able to do so. It is a crazy tale. I don't know why I wanted to show it. I think it's something to deal with history, how times are always changing. Just because things seem certain in the moment, things are going good, doesn't mean in the future it'll keep going good. It could continuously blossom and be this never-ending growth of success, but we should always be prepared for what is to come, whether that is good or bad. Look, that is really all I have to talk about the archives. This video can go on for years if I want to talk about everything that was found within this archival project. It is truly fascinating. I implore you, go check out the resources that are found within the Library of Congress. It is truly fascinating. You have people that were on Broadway at the time, were Broadway stars that have recordings here before they were ever on Broadway. You'll find a lot of fascinating tales on there. There's a lot of interviews as well where people just talk about what it was like to face through a monstrous storm. People talk about how the doors being flown off. There was this vicious era of wind that was constantly going through, and people at this time were very descriptive. Look, just take a listen from this one little clip.
I can tell you the story about the dust storm I experienced while I was it done lots of damage to small buildings, blowed them completely away, and tore the roofs off of the larger buildings. Some of them blowed the windows out of the houses, turned cars over and things like that. A straight wind, no twister to it. And the dust was so thick that you could see nothing at all. You just absolutely couldn't see through it at all. Just dark as it could possibly be. And it was that way for about 14 hours. It blowed steady that way. There seemed like no let-up at all. It was strong as it could be. You couldn't walk in it. And I was living in a little old flimsy-made house that I didn't think was too strong. However, it weathered the storm almost completely. It blew 2 of the window lights out. And the next morning, after the storm was over, the dust was 1/4 of an inch thick all over everything in the house. And the first and only storm of the kind that I ever saw in that country. There wasn't a drop of rain with it, no thunder, lightning, or nothing. Just a plain old dust storm.
You see, they talk with such calm in their voice, but the words that they're saying is truly horrifying. Go check it out. It is an incredible tale, and I'm sure you go farther down the rabbit hole. Well, that is basically all I have to talk about for the Voices of the Dust Bowl project on the Library of Congress. Thank you so much for taking the time to watching this video. If you like this video, let me know, because I had an amazing time doing the research for this project, and I want to make more tales from the archives as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me out a lot. If you want to leave any suggestions, I'll be happy to do the readings for them as well. Thank you so much, and have a lovely evening.